Okay, as soon as we're ready.
Okay, great. I'd like to welcome everyone to our Planning Commission meeting tonight. Let's go ahead and get started with the Pledge of Allegiance. Oh no, do we start with the determination letter? I think we do that, huh?
Yeah, start with the determination letter.
Sorry. I'm getting things all out of order. All right. So in accordance with Utah Code 52-4-207, subsection 4 of the Utah Open and Public Meeting Act, I have determined that conducting an electronic meeting of the Centerville City Planning Commission with an anchor location presents a substantial risk to the health and safety of those who may be present at the anchor location. This determination is based on the facts and circumstances surrounding the COVID-19 pandemic. Considering the continued number of COVID-19 case counts in Utah, being at an anchor location presents substantial risk to the health and safety of those in attendance because physical distancing measures may be difficult to maintain at City Hall. Okay, now let's go ahead and get started with a Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. And I think I saw Heidi pop in. There she is. So I've asked Commissioner Shagru to offer our prayer and or thought tonight. So we'll turn some time over to her and hear what she has to say.
Thank you. Sorry I was late. I was just waiting forever. It said river, I think, on my Zoom. And anyway, I'm here. Okay. So my thought was, I was just really inspired last week when we had our inauguration by Amanda Gorman, our national laureate poet, something like that. Anyway, I just wanted to not share her whole poem that she read, but some of the words that impressed me that I felt like were just really inspiring. And so the poem she read was titled "The Hill We Climb." And you can read the whole poem. It's somewhere online, and it takes, it's like a 7-minute poem to read. But some of the highlights that inspired me are these. When day comes, we ask ourselves, where can we find light in this never-ending shade? But one thing is certain, if we merge mercy with might and might with right, then love becomes our legacy and change our children's birthright. So let us leave behind a country better than the one we were left with. When day comes, we step out of the shade, aflame and unafraid. The new dawn blooms as we free it, for there is always light. If only we're brave enough to see it, if only we're brave enough to be it. And so hopefully we can just start this new year great and be inspired by those around us who are leading. And so that's my thought. Anyway, great. Do you want me to start with a prayer? So I'll say that now. Sure. Okay. Our dear Father, we're grateful for this opportunity we have to serve our neighbors and the citizens of Centerville, and we're grateful for this blessing in our lives, and we pray that we can think clearly and make good choices moving forward. And we say this in the name of Jesus Christ, amen.
Great. Thank you. That was perfect. All right, well, let's get right onto it then. We've got some land use training, and Lisa is going to make us the best trained planning commission anywhere in the state. So
yes. Well, that's all up to you guys. But yes, thank you. So let me see. I'll just share my screen here. Okay. Can you guys see that? All right. Well, yes. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to provide some training that we will be doing throughout the year if it goes okay. Oh, wait. I want to start my timer. Okay, there we go. So we talked about, reviewing and reading the entire Utah Land Use Management Act. So it's a lot of code, a lot of statute, but, it's what I do for a living. So I thought it was interesting because I learned some things that, I hadn't picked up on before. So it's always, I think, a good exercise. And I don't know if the Planning Commission was serious, but, none of us have really been able to travel much this year. And so for those newer commissioners, usually when I do my training, I kind of add in some pictures of my most recent travels. So anyway, I decided to do a little bit of training on the Land Use Act and also a little bit of lessons from the mountain. As I was going through my pictures, I decided to pick one of my first and most difficult trips was the Kilimanjaro trek in 2011. So it was 10 years ago. And anyway, I was looking through the pictures and I just thought, there's a lot of things that are similar about the mountain and being a planning commissioner. So anyway, number one is that it's really great to have goals. And I think it was Commissioner Wright that said, look, let's write our goals down. Let's look at them often and we will be more successful in accomplishing those goals. So I really liked when she said that and I thought about that and I think it's true, so anyway, we're going to have this goal of the Utah Land Use Management Act for the whole year. So, so we're going to have one slide of code, one slide of lessons from the mountain. And as Chair Daly had mentioned when you first agreed to tackle this was that let's limit it to 15 to 20 minutes. I agree with that. I think that's about a good time period for people to really focus on training and statutes. But anyway, so just going through this first page is really the title and purpose of the act. And I think it's interesting and a good opportunity to read through what the legislature thinks are important goals and purposes for land use management. And you'll see some of those are conflicting so as a commissioner, you actually have to balance all of these stated purposes, because sometimes protecting the tax base might not be the same thing as protecting property values or, providing fundamental fairness as well as growth in housing. So I think they have also added here down at the bottom that, we need to consider the surrounding land uses and balance the foregoing purposes between the landowner's private property interests and the associated constitutional protection. So you'll often hear Corey say, yes, we need to balance these acts, but if there's any question about interpretation of the statutes or the ordinances, we're going to err on the side of the private property rights. And we'll get into that more in the code as well. So just moving on, mountain lesson number 2 is that the journey is long. Planning Commission terms are 3 years. Once we've got you trained and up and running, we like you to sort of agree to another 3 years. So you may be looking at as much as 6 years. And so anyway, I do appreciate all the effort that goes into agreeing to be a planning commissioner, and just be patient with yourself because it does take a lot of time to learn all the terms and code and things like that. So, okay, so what I did, and feel free, if you saw some interesting things on a page or you took some notes, feel free to add in as well. I can't see all of you, but most of you, you can just chime in. But I just highlighted some of the terms that I thought would be interesting to talk about, or make sure that everybody knows. And again, we're dealing with a very planning commission. We have some that have been here almost 6 years and some that are brand new. So I want to have that balance. So basically these terms are, just helping everyone understand some interesting terms. So the first one is accessory dwelling unit. It's been a big debate, also known as an ADU. And it, basically is a habitable living space. It can be detached or attached. There's a lot of legislation this year, a lot of discussion about ADUs. So you'll want to know that term. Appeal authority. This is the authority that the city has designated by ordinance to hear appeals of land use decisions. So for any planning commission, if it's a final decision of the planning commission, the appeal authority is the Board of Adjustment. If the city council makes the final decision of a land use decision, like on a zoning ordinance or something like that, or a rezone, then the appeal authority is the district court. So it's important to understand where your decision goes, should somebody want to appeal that. And we do have a Board of Appeals. We don't go to them very often, thank goodness, but every few years, Corey and I will have to take something up on appeal, or they also have original jurisdiction on things like non-conforming uses and things like that. So, and then the last thing on this page is the conditional use, also known as a CUP. So in the zoning code, you can either have a use that's permitted or one that is conditional. And we've talked, for those commissioners that have been on the commission for some time, and we know that the law has changed over the years so that there are very strict restrictions on approving a conditional use permit. And basically, if it meets the ordinance, you can find that the conditional use meets the ordinance, then generally we need to approve that. But if you can show some negative impacts that cannot be mitigated, then perhaps you could deny a CUP. So hopefully all of those things for the more seasoned commissioners ring a bell. Negative impacts that can't be mitigated. So, okay, next thing is it takes preparation. So we did this trip in September of 2011, and we actually trained practically a year out for it. And so Kilimanjaro is the highest mountain in Africa at 19,340 feet. So the air at the top is almost half the oxygen that we're breathing, at sea level. So it was kind of a daunting task, but it does take a lot of preparation, and being a commissioner as well. It takes a lot of, training and learning, and even for our meetings as well, we do a lot of preparation and organizing. So, okay, we only have one term that I thought was interesting on this page, which is the general plan. We do have a general plan, which is basically a guiding document. And then the zoning ordinance really governs what the council has adopted as the land use regulations of the city. Centerville's a little interesting in this situation, and I've kind of wanted to change our statutes because usually the general plan is just advisory. It says this is what we would like, but there's a couple areas in our code that we say, look, we're not going to approve this kind of application unless it complies with the general plan. Therefore, we've actually made the general plan by reference mandatory. So it's an interesting nuance with Centerville's ordinance. And I don't love it. And Corey and I have also talked about this, but it's also hard to do away with it because we do have some density caps in our general plan. We have some, land use density issues of, high intensity and low intensity. So we haven't tackled that yet. And just for the commission, for the last maybe 2 budgets, we've tried to put in some money to hire a consultant to actually do a comprehensive rewrite of our general plan. Obviously with COVID, the budget was sort of slashed in the beginning and it didn't make it back in. But hopefully we're entering the next budget cycle, and hopefully we will get the money in there again to try and get a comprehensive update. It's really hard to try and keep up with, the general plan, and it's just been written in so many different years. It would really be nice to have a rewrite. So if that comes up, it will come to the Planning Commission because it is something that comes to the Planning Commission for public hearing and a recommendation to the City Council. So general plan, I think, is an important guiding document. It's sort of the bedrock, and then above that you have your zoning code. Okay, it can get a little rocky. sometimes we've had very large public hearings. It can get controversial. I mean, when you're dealing with property rights and people's home and people's property where they have most of their investment, it can get very emotional and passionate. And I think we've often said this commission is amazing at civic dialogue and discourse, and handling the public comment with respect. You just do a great job. So we really appreciate that. And so this picture is actually at about, this was the highest camp that we had to sleep at, which was about 15,600 feet, which is pretty high. We don't have any place in Utah that's 15,000 feet. And this night, you don't sleep much because you get up at midnight to try and make the ascent of to the top. So you have to climb 4,000 feet, basically with no oxygen. So they make you get up at midnight. And our group was kind of slow, and so we actually got up at 11:30 to start. They made us start a half hour early because they were worried about us. But anyway. Oh, yeah. Oops. Uh-oh. Can you still? Oh, there we go. Yeah. And these are the facilities that you have to use. So coming back home, I'm always very grateful. Okay. Page 4. The two terms that I thought were interesting is geologic hazards. They do have a statutory definition of a geologic hazard. We've talked about adopting a geologic hazards ordinance. We address this in a couple areas of our code. We have a section that with a site plan, sometimes you have to identify some of these items. And we also require a geotechnical report for any development that's in the hillside. So if you're in the hillside overlay up on the foothills, you have to do a geotechnical report. But we don't have an actual geologic hazards ordinance that gets into a lot of details. Which has been something sort of on our list of maybe we might want to get into it. But I think we've done a good job because our ordinances also say that the Planning Commission can require additional information if needed to make a decision. And we've used that ordinance clause sometimes to require a geologic hazards study, so or geotechnical report. And usually those are pretty good. And we send them out for someone else to tell us anything we need to worry about. I put the Historic Preservation Authority here for Mackenzie. We do have our landmark commission. Unfortunately, we don't have a full quorum of members right now. So, but we do have our Dual Creek Historic District and some historic preservation ordinances. So just wanted to highlight that. Okay. I love this picture. This was one that I actually framed and had in my office at home. But so mountain lesson is that many people contribute. And I for those of you that have been on the Planning Commission for years, I always try to help you understand that a lot of work goes in behind the scenes to get applications ready and to the Planning Commission. There's the Development Review Committee that meets with developers every Monday morning. That's the way we start our week, meeting with angry developers. Well, not always angry, but every Monday we meet with developers on their projects 2 or 3 times before it comes to the Planning Commission. Lots of noticing. The next training will be on all the noticing that has to go out. But I think it's just good to always recognize those people behind the scenes that contribute to making the Planning Commission and the rest of us successful and getting these applications and staff reports ready. Anyway, I don't know if you can see, but these are all the people helping carry things. These are actually not any of the trekkers. They all get up and they go first. They get up early and they go first. So we were just off to the side. We hadn't really started. So, and then this is our destination way over here. That's where we're going. And this is across the flatlands. Kilimanjaro actually has 3 volcano cones. But we were going to that one. Okay. Oh, this is my favorite slide. I don't know about you, Mason, but I call this the land use decision page. So there's land use applicant, land use application, land use permit, land use decision, anyway, we've talked a lot about, maybe the newer commissioners don't, but even on our agenda, we talk about administrative decisions versus legislative decisions. And that always makes a difference because there's a different standard of review should someone challenge your decision. And so a couple of years ago, they decided to, rather than just calling it administrative decision or legislative decision, it's now a land use decision, which is an administrative decision, and a land use regulation, which is the legislative decision. So now we have to remember, oh, wait, okay, the decision is administrative, the regulation is legislative. And so then now they're trying to use these terms throughout the code rather than, administrative and legislative. I just prefer to be direct, but anyway, I'm sure there's reasons for it. So they're making distinctions between a land use decision as an administrative decision on a land use permit or a land use application or any kind of enforcement. And then there's the land use regulation, which is the legislative decision and adoption, and so I think they're saying, regardless of whether a city council, because sometimes people were arguing, well, it's a city council decision or we adopted it by ordinance, so it's a legislative decision. And they're saying, no, it has to be amending your zoning code. And again, if it's a land use regulation, the standard of review is reasonably debatable, which is a very low standard, and we usually are given a lot of deference by the courts. But if it's an administrative decision, which is a lot of what the Planning Commission decides, there has to be substantial evidence in the record to support your decision. And so that's why we're always saying, look to the code. If you're going to deny something, you have to find a reason in the code or a reason that their application is deficient. And then that has to be in the record to support your decision. And then, just kind of trying to make a distinction too between the land use authority, which is typically the legislative body, or the commission. Well, the commission is the land use authority on most administrative things. Okay, it is a small world. So we've probably been out on the mountain for about 5 days, and we came into this, they have like huts just out on the mountain, and we're out in the middle of nowhere. And I don't know if you guys, if there's any skiers out there, but we came across these two gentlemen and it says Deer Valley Ski School. So here we are, clear across the world, and we've got some people wearing our local ski hill ski suits. So that was kind of crazy, but it was nice to see. And I think that's always good to remember, not only a small world, but trying to put yourself in someone else's position, whether it's the applicant or the neighborhood. Just understanding that these are difficult decisions and stressful for the people that are actually applying or speaking. Okay, page 6. Okay, so we've got legislative body. So that is the council. Land use authority is the planning commission. Legislative body is the council. And then we've got lot line adjustments. I just highlighted that because there's a distinction between a lot and a parcel. So a parcel is basically just described by meets and bounds, and it's never been subdivided with a plat. And then a lot is a lot within a subdivided plat. And there's different procedures. If you want to move a boundary line between you and your neighbor, it makes a difference whether you and your neighbor are both in a subdivision or if you're both just undivided parcels. The city doesn't actually have any authority to regulate moving a parcel boundary line, but we do have some authority to regulate the lot line adjustment. But stay tuned because they're also amending those this legislative session. So we're hopeful that they will fix the complicated morass that is boundary line adjustment. Moderate income housing, or MIH, you need to know about that. We have to review that plan every year. I did look up moderate income housing. statistics for Davis County, and Corey probably knows these, but oh shoot, gosh, we're already out of time. Okay, I'm just going to skip that. Well, I should say that moderate income housing, I don't know, the median income in Davis County was $87,000, so, or $84,000. So your median income, 80% of that would be $67,000. So those are the people that moderate income housing is applying to. Okay, some things might be intimidating. This looks like a desert, but we're still at like 12,000 feet. And this huge storm bank was just coming in, and yeah, it was pretty intimidating. I kind of liken this to, yeah, a really big public hearing, kind of coming in, you can see what it's doing. And we ended this day hiking in pouring rain. It did catch up with us. We basically walked right into it. Okay, so, yep, this one's going across the spice route. I'm just going to go right to the pictures because that's what's interesting. Oh, okay. So this again was earlier on, and this is me and my sister Patty, and shortly thereafter she had slipped. And so just remember, you never know, you might lose your footing, but you can get back up, and she made it to the top of the mountain later, so it's fine. Goals are good. And yeah, the view from the top is amazing. So, but sorry, I was going to leave some time for questions too. So this was one of the longer chapters though. It was 10 pages. So I did go through that quickly, but I'm happy to answer any questions. And as I had talked about, you know, this was a really boring chapter. So, but as we get into the other chapters, I'm kind of hoping that maybe it might be more like a book club kind of discussion of people bringing up things that they thought were interesting. So if anybody has any questions or found some interesting sections, I'm happy to answer questions.
Does anybody have any questions for Lisa about definitions?
I didn't have any questions, but I just wanted to comment. I love seeing the pictures and the metaphors between the hike and planning commission. That was awesome. I was really interested to learn about the geologic hazards, and I personally am pretty interested in, I know you said that you've talked about maybe adding that as a definition in our code. I think that could be a potentially very beneficial thing to have in the code, just because then when we actually have to make a decision, we can refer to that hazard, you know.
Yeah, and I think we may, well, I can check that, see if we do define it, but what we were talking about was doing a more comprehensive, like an entire chapter in the code, but
About the different hazards.
yeah, and how, you know, what to require, but I'll double check. I mean, I did check on a lot of these definitions or things, and so it was a good exercise for me. And but yeah, I can check and see if we've added that definition, or if we just define it in the hillside area. But even I think you're right. Even referring back to the state statute definition is helpful.
Yeah.
Just so you know, our geologic hazard ordinance is not developed, and it does need to be brought up to speed. But the hillside overlay that we use was carried over prior to 2002, and it's called a sensitive lands ordinance originally, and that was our geologic hazard ordinance. So we still have a geologic hazard ordinance, but it would be severely out of date probably at this point.
Yeah, and so this talks about surface fault rupture, shallow groundwater, liquefaction, landslide, debris flow, unstable soil, rock fall, or anything else. Yeah, I like that definition. So, okay. Anything else? And anybody else want a gold star?
Well, Lisa, I was wondering if for those of us who are not in development or any other type of land types of things, if there's a quick explanation of 55, 60, and 69, receiving zone, sending zone, and what's the other one? Land transfer.
Yes. So transfer of development rights, TDRs. So these are sort of to help conserve large acreages of land. So you might have some area in your city where you want to preserve. And so you'll allow developers to, donate land and transfer their development rights for that land somewhere else, for density elsewhere to preserve that land, or vice versa. But anyway, so that's why you can actually designate receiving areas and transfer areas. And I think Farmington was working on, they had a conservation subdivision ordinance where they were really trying to encourage conservation of certain lands, to get a lot of acreage in one area. And so that's what those are all about.
We don't have anything like that here, do we?
We do not.
The only place that I probably see TDRs working in Centerville for now is the concept that there is a lot of private ground on the east side above Centerville. And currently our annexation plan does not envision annexing it in to the city, because most of the residents through the years have been opposed to increasing the hillside development up further. But at some point in time, the county cannot provide services there. So there'll be over some time when there'll be some push to try to get the city to give services to that area. And that's a place that I think would be, if that ever comes to fruition, would be ripe for transferring the densities from up in that area and development pattern to another area of the city, whether it's infill, whether it's the west side, whatever we want to do, in order to protect too much development up the hillside. But to date, we don't want to annex, and that's been the position of the city, is we're not going to annex. So all those properties up there are 1 to 40 acre zoning or resort under the county.
That's good. Thanks for putting that into layman's terms. That makes a lot of sense now. So.
Yeah. And thanks to Mackenzie, we were talking a little bit about this. I was telling her how interesting it was to read through this and a couple things that I had noticed. And yeah, she had noticed up at the very beginning that I think on the first page that the state had reserved to them exclusive jurisdiction to regulate oil and gas. And I didn't remember that being in there. And so I went and looked at the legislative history, and it was adopted at sometime in 2018. So yeah, evidently they wanted to make that clear that they have that exclusive authority. So
does that include mineral rights as well, or just oil and gas?
Let's see. Well, this is just talking about oil and gas.
Huh.
So yeah, I think just oil and gas. I don't, mineral rights, certainly.
Most of your resource extraction gets reserved to the private property owners, and that's where you get your gravel pits. So.
Okay. Anybody else have any more questions for Lisa or any others on this? Great. Excellent, Lisa. Thank you for taking the time to highlight some of those, and love the pictures. It does help to kind of tie those two together and relate those together. So we look forward to the next one.
All right. Well, thanks. Yeah, next time. So we'll just do it the second meeting of every month, or at least as long as we can. And yeah, the next chapter is on noticing. So that'll be fun. I'll try to have more pictures.
All right, so the next one that we're talking about is we're going to talk about bylaws, and we're going to do bylaws review. It looks like I'm going to guess Mackenzie is going to handle this one since she popped up, and I'll turn the time over to Mackenzie.
Thank you, Chair Daly and members of the commission. So I'm just going to share the document that I uploaded to the agenda. So I went through the ordinance that governs the Planning Commission and where the City Council has given the Planning Commission authority. And I reviewed the bylaws, and everything in red is items that are specifically addressed in the city ordinance. So for the most part, the bylaws without the red are just a simplified version of Robert's Rules of Order. With, we've got the order of items, who writes the agenda, how business should be conducted. But most of these things are covered in Robert's Rules of Order. And this could be a handy tool to give to each planning commissioner so they all are up to date on the procedure that is Robert's Rules of Order. But otherwise, quite a lot is code or just Robert's Rules of Order for the layman. So what I'm asking from the commission tonight is just, A, if you want me to go through and study some more, or if, I guess the recommendation is, do you want us to study and work on creating different bylaws or editing the bylaws, or make them part of the ordinance? That is my question for you today.
That, yeah, that's a good question, Mackenzie. What I think, you're right, it does when you take out all the strike throughs and stuff, it doesn't leave a whole lot in there. I do think it'd be nice to have a guide or something simplified for planning commissioners to use. You know, when we're meeting in person at City Hall, there's always the little card that's sitting there on the dais that gives you the order of things, and it's kind of nice sometimes to look at that, especially for newer commissioners, to be able to see the cheat sheet, I guess you'd say. So I think it'd be nice to really simplify it down to 1-2 pages of here's what to expect and here's how things are going to flow. But I definitely would welcome any input from other commissioners about what they'd like to see from this.
I would like something like Kevin said, just a condensed version of it, just to have it for reference. That's just my opinion.
I think that it's good to have the larger version. I mean, there are things on here that I read that I've never even seen before, a motion to reconsider, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't come up or that it won't come up. And so if ever there's a question, it would be nice to have access to the larger list, which doesn't mean that we can't simplify it and have like a condensed cheat sheet version sitting there on the dais. But I thought that it was fine. I mean, if you clean it up the way that Mackenzie has done it, take out the red, add the green, add a couple of minor nits, but otherwise I was supportive of it.
The only thing I would say is for the situations where you were able to take everything out, it might still be nice to have just a very brief, I mean, I think most of them are pretty self-explanatory, but if there is something that has no definition next to it, or, you know, no further instruction, if we're keeping it, like Shaylin is saying, like a full version, it might be nice to have those still sort of defined out or simplified, you know. And then you could do like a really brief, like half sheet, just like outline of sorts or simple thing. And then you could do the full thing so we can kind of in our brains have gone through the full thing and then remember with this short part.
So you're asking her to do kind of both the short form and the long form?
Well, the short form is essentially like taking all of the like sentences out and just doing a little outline. I don't think I'm asking for too much to ask for a short form, but I think
you're just asking for bullet points.
Yeah, just like an outline you would see. Because if we've read through the whole document and we understand it, like Shaylin is saying, then it's not like we're going to need a cheat sheet. If it's a cheat sheet and it's too big, then it's not going to be useful. But if it's just a little outline and then we can refer to what we've studied, then it seems like that could be pretty useful. But I'm open to whatever.
The cheat sheet that's sitting there now is essentially number 1 under order and decorum. I mean, that's really what's sitting there on the dais. And that's the thing that I think when I was chair, I would generally look to make sure that I wasn't screwing up an order, that I was making sure that I was opening the public hearing and closing the public hearing and, you know, doing that kind of thing. All the rest for me, I mean, it's very rare that you would need to consult it, I think. I will say, Mackenzie, that in that order and decorum section under 1B, we have historically not just allowed staff to make presentation and recommendation, but also to allow commissioners to ask questions of staff as part of that number B. So I would add that.
And I'll jump in and add my voice that I'm generally in favor of these edits. I think it's good to simplify and to reduce redundancy and potential conflict. The way I view bylaws in this context is for primarily two reasons. First is to prevent perhaps a rogue commissioner from going too far astray. But then second, to increase institutional knowledge that as commissioners turn over or as staff turn over, that we try to adhere to the same things. When we talk about a cheat sheet or a shortened version, I don't know if that necessarily means that it should be put into the bylaws. A cheat sheet or a shortened version can just be exactly that. It's a separate document that we use as guidance, but that the bylaws themselves act as the bylaws and just stand alone. That would be my thought.
Great.
Okay, can I ask this stupid question?
No stupid questions.
Oh, I'm stupid. But okay, so the bylaws, those just apply to the planning commission, right?
Correct. In
Okay.
the ordinance, the city council has given you permission to create any regulations with what they've already, like they've given you a framework and you can fill in the framework. So
Okay. So for me, not coming in, later ago, not knowing what was going on, I would love to have something like this to know what is going on. So I will agree to anything, but for me, I like to know what I need to know. I don't know if that makes any sense, but
it does.
okay.
I would have loved to have this right off the
Yeah.
bat as well. So
It would have been great. Yeah.
okay, so what I'm hearing is to streamline the bylaws, but keep them as bylaws. And I can create a bulleted document to give to each of you to reference in the middle of meetings.
Yeah, a separate document that's not bylaws, but that maybe summarizes the essentially like the order and decorum type stuff, and maybe the motions as well.
Okay.
Right? Yeah.
Okay, I will do that and then draft bylaws to be approved by you, and then they do need to be approved by the city council as well. So I'll bring that back.
Okay, thanks, Mackenzie. Very good. Okay, moving on to our next item on the agenda, we have a discussion about, we're going to continue our discussion, I guess, about off-street parking regulations, and we'll turn the time over to Corey.
Thank you, Chair Daly, members of the commission. Just so you know, on site, when I was on silent, I had the video from YouTube with Toto playing Africa in the background as I listened to the presentation. So I very much enjoyed it. I don't plan on going through the parking line by line with you. I'm just going to share with you what I did and then some observations. First, we just did the second category in our parking tables, and it's called public and civic uses. So it centers around a lot of educational, some cultural services, government facilities, things like that, that you can envision in that category. In the past, for some background, my observations are kind of a couple of fold with this section. The first one is the assembly type uses. So you think of the no longer reception center out here in the west side of the city where I'm located at my office. That was a place that had a parking modification a little bit and borrowed some parking from some neighbors. That would be kind of in this assembly use category. If you remember, there was a church that came in with a CUP, and there was a lot of discussion regarding the parking because it was a reuse building of the O'Brien Glass, the Bridge Community Church, and it had a limited number of parking stalls. And so on the gatherings. We were measuring it against assembly areas and having a discussion on how many parking that they need, and they borrowed from surrounding sites for that parking. Those are kind of in this category of uses where we have a lot of, it's kind of loosely measured. It's the fixed seats, and then the non-fixed seats, how much assembly you have. We had discussion is, okay, maybe you have enough for multiple assemblies, like a church could have crossover meetings, and you're calculating it only against the assembly area of the building, but there are multiple crossovers of multiple services, and you're not necessarily covering all the parking in that case. And so I see that, particularly in neighborhoods, even if you live behind a church facility, you seem to drive the car anyway. So we have kind of this issues where these assemblies create these parking tensions that occur. The other place I see that's potentially problematic is as we deal with, and you'll see this in some future ones too, but assisted livings, nursing homes, convalescent centers. The calculations of number of beds are always a place of debate. I mean, how many parking stalls do you need at a convalescent center where the residents that are there on a more permanent basis versus assisted living that may still be ambulatory and be able to come and go a little more on their own depending on the situation. So, and then you have the memory care facilities that are associated with the assisted living facilities. Assisted living facilities used to be really ambulatory patients that needed some supplement, a kitchen or some food or some brief medical care. And now we have assisted living facilities showing up with memory care facilities. And so they're expanding more into the convalescence in the healthcare under their licenses and under the market, the demands that they have. And so if you think of, the Oak Ridge, it's on Rawlings Circle. They expanded from, I think, 10 beds to 16. It was on a residential lot because we allow assisted living to occur in a residential medium zone. And it was really severely constrained to try to get the parking, the landscaping, place for ambulances. The fire district is always looking for ambulances service to come into these facilities when need be. And here we're putting on a little pie-shaped lot that was slated for originally a single family home. And so we kind of have some of those crossover issues. And so I think that's where I put in the comments. These are probably things that we ought to look at changing or looking at further study is primarily those type of categories. And so with that, I'm just going to turn it over to you, the observations. Some of you have had experience in past situations and just verify whether my observations are heading the right direction.
Thanks, Corey. Couple thoughts, questions I guess I had as I went through this myself. It seems like in a lot of the areas where you had identified or noted that changes may be warranted, things like the auditorium, the church, the club or service organization, we generally are at a 1 per 6 seats. Other cities seem to be at 1 per 4, maybe 1 per 5. Is the thought maybe that, help me understand the change that you're thinking of? Is it to mirror what the other cities are doing, or maybe that our 1 per 6 plus 1 space per 100 square feet is too complicated? What are you thinking there?
I didn't compare it so much feeling like the other cities were distinctly better off in a situation or worse off than us. I didn't really see that as my finding. I'm just kind of wondering if we're all a little bit off. Because I think the Bridge Community Church was a place where they were only providing 20 something stalls, and they had a large assembly area, didn't have fixed seats. And so we got into how many fixed seats could they really put in. versus the bench space, which is a little bit more objective. And then I kind of go into the idea from my experiences is that if you Bridge Community Church, probably to their benefit, have a pretty controlled congregation situation. They're a smaller church. They probably only have a service or two. But I think if you applied this to a more predominant religious sector, the crossover is drastically larger. And I think they do a good job trying to measure against their parking demand. But I've observed just about everywhere at some point in time that parking can overflow all down the streets and into the neighborhood, depending on what type of facility that particular religious institution labels it as. And so if they think it's a small area serving a small congregation, they'll build it with so many stalls. If they think it's one where it's more of a larger regional, they'll build a little larger facility. But I've seen in Centerville where we had to do some church expansion in the middle of a neighborhood, and the tension that was showing up is they were trying to get more parking because they were underparked for their small facility. But the city ordinances were getting in the way and trying to demand the upgrade in landscaping because the church was built such a long time ago that there was no landscaping. And because they exceeded the parameter of 30% expansion, they had to upgrade all of their landscaping. And then you had the tension between, well, I don't want to put parking islands because I want to be able to plow the truck all the way through the neighborhood. So I hate parking lot islands. And so we got into this whole debate about how many stalls should they have and versus what they, from a need standpoint, versus what the code said. So I'm looking a little broader that maybe we ought to check outside of the local jurisdictions around us because we're kind of close and just see how it's calculated. Now, I got to be a confession to you. I'm talking against myself right at this minute because there is a trend to worry less about providing a Walmart. So I'm going to use Walmart as an example. Walmart will build the biggest, largest parking lot they possibly can build because they never want anybody to ever be turned away from parking. But when you look at the value ratio of that kind of behavior, it's better to set a maximum parking and allow either more footprint space because you get a better return on the land use pattern, or you get less asphalt and urban heating associated with it. So I could be talking against myself by saying we might need to increase church facility parking, but at the same time, there's kind of this trend to not over park anything and better maximize your land uses. So once again, the planner always conflicted and doesn't know which direction we're going.
Oh, that's good, Corey. That's yeah, it is tricky. And part of me, I think I brought this up a couple of weeks ago that it seems to me like Target, probably Walmart as well, tons and tons of parking there. Probably not really much problem with people finding spots. They may not like walking from halfway out in the lot, but whatever. But it seems like it's other uses that we run into those parking issues more often than not. Certainly the Bridge Church was a good example of that. We had a lot of discussion about that. Does anybody else have any questions for Corey about parking? Thoughts, comments about this?
I have one, sorry. I'm going to understand this stuff. I was just looking through this. Why are we, when comparatively, we're always more? Are we wanted that way, or I just kind of explain why we're always have more parking than, require more parking than others? If that's a valid question, I don't know.
Yeah, this parking table was created in 2002, I think adopted in early 2003. I arrived in 2004. I know that there was a lot of work, and I don't know if Lisa remembers if we had a consultant help us with this whole, because the entire zoning code was revamped in 2003. And it's my observation that sometimes there wasn't a lot of research put. It was just grabbing codes and not reinventing the wheel. And so one thing I don't have a good answer for is in 2003 or 2002, we set this parking table. How about the other jurisdictions? When did they set their parking table? Has it been updated since? And is that the differentiation? But I can say that parking did create some anxiety in the past along Main Street. And so the example I think I brought up several times is office is typically in a parking table 4 per thousand, very similar to retail. But Centerville does 5 per thousand. And I know that 5 per thousand was explicitly Centerville wanting to go more to try to reduce the conflicts of Main Street parking trailing up into the neighborhoods on some of the dental clinics that were in place, the dental clinic of controversy. And so I make a little bit of that there may be some updates where this trend of reducing parking has been occurring, and that's why we're showing a little bit more than everybody else. But I also want to give credence that maybe in that discussion in 2002, we were so worried about parking in some instances that we hedged it a little more aggressively to demand more parking for a lot of uses. But again, I'm being very speculative at this point with my answer.
Thank you.
Corey, just back to the 2002, 2003, when was the Walmart put in?
Walmart was put in 2000. It arrived a week before I arrived. So they were in the middle of their approval process, just beginning it in 2004, but they did not construct it for 2006 because of all the architecture demands of the city. They wanted to finish 2 other Walmarts first before everybody saw what they constructed in Centerville. So it took a couple of years before they actually finished it.
And the movie theater was after that?
Movie theater was after that. That's a little different calculation because that was a planned development overlay.
That's what I was going to ask next.
Yeah, and there was initial thought pattern by both the developer and the city that we would potentially lobby for a station stop. And everybody knew that that would be right around Parish Lane. And so that northeastern corner that always goes unused was the intended place for a potential stop. And so the layout is a little bit, the layout underserves the demand of where the parking needs to occur, but it was intended to be a transit-oriented development potentially in the future. And so they did a quite as extensive shared parking arrangements among all the uses.
Okay. So that was my last question. That kind of ties to my next question about the overlay. Have you seen beyond actual developments that have the overlay and something like that specific, have you ever seen like an overlay of a historic district or an area that maybe they might be concerned about parking spilling out from, adjacent commercial, where you can sort of do an overlay there and then the rest of the city has a more, applicable parking that would not be as needed as these areas that are sensitive areas, I guess, next to commercials areas?
I don't know of one personally, and I've not participated in one. Usually that when you're doing what I'm familiar with is specially planned areas. So if you go up to Summit County, they don't call it overlay, they call it specially planned areas. There's some controversy up there. And I would say that my experience with even those areas is similar to the megaplex. You're taking a specific development and you're trying to accommodate what you think a future TOD area is or a historic area is, and determine, you know, if the shared parking works without a overflow to some other place. But related to historic area, no, I've not seen anything related specifically to an historic area.
Okay.
Corey, I have not really a question and more of a comment with regard to, and I appreciate all of the effort that you've put into this table. And we have a number of places where staff has suggested that changes would be warranted. What would be helpful for me to see is, because you have the historic knowledge on a lot of these properties and sort of why ours is the way that it is, and you have more experience with it, what I would love to see is a recommendation from staff on these ones where you say change is warranted. What type of change does staff, applying its expertise, think would be best? That would be helpful for me.
Yeah, if you go back to my previous memo, the way I approached it, and we certainly can change the approach, was just wondering if these changes may be warranted. Highlighted are the uses that the commission is concerned about. Then we would take that, rather than try to redo the whole table, we would take the areas that you think potentially are problematic, suggested by us if you agree, and then we would further study those and come back with what we think we ought to be doing, and show you, you know, we'd probably use our traffic manual, you know, the national traffic manual, compare it against that. Because we have our city engineer that has a traffic engineer that we can consult with and make some expenditures in that consultation. Have them look at it, what they suggested, broaden the horizon from just a surrounding city comparison, and then probably come back with, here's where we think the lines should be at. I was just trying to narrow down right now, what uses should we look at?
And I apologize, that was my misunderstanding. I saw the PC proposal blank box, and my natural reaction is to fill something into that empty box there.
I probably mislabeled that, just maybe as PC agreement or something that says, yeah, go check those.
Is there a reason you didn't use Bountiful Cities as another sort of gauge?
A little bit, not explicitly. I just looked at, you know, I still look at Centerville from the idea that we're a small community, and I don't look at Bountiful with that character.
That's what I was wondering. I just thought I would.
But it wasn't like, oh, I don't want to do Bountiful. It was just a selection of trying to maintain where I think our demand and intensity is like. But we do have a Walmart, and West Bountiful doesn't. So, you know, I'm shooting myself in the foot with my explanation.
So, Corey, I think that's a good suggestion from Commissioner Heyman about, you know, let's go back and review these, study these, and come back to us with a proposal or a recommendation. I think it'd also be helpful, and I hope this wouldn't be too tedious, but, you know, there's a lot of these things that we don't have. I mean, you know, we don't have a standalone auditorium or stadium in the city that I know of, unless somebody else can tell me one that I'm missing. You know, we don't have I'm not sure exactly what cultural service might be, but we don't have a golf course, but you didn't recommend any changes there, so who cares? But anyway, I think it'd be helpful if you come back, for example, with church or place of worship. We do have a lot of those around the city, to say, okay, here's our suggestion for a change. If we adopt this change, here are a few examples of what that would do to some specific locations, so you can kind of help to visualize what that change means. And you might not have all the data that you'd need to calculate that, like you wouldn't know how many seats are inside, but maybe we could try and make our best guess at some of that somehow, but somehow to help us visualize what that change actually would result in. It would mean we need to have 100 more stalls here, or actually they could cut it down there, or whatever it is. You know what I mean? Does that make sense, Corey?
Yeah, I figured we would take, the purpose of this quick review is just to say, are these the ones we have concerns on? I mean, I agree with you. We don't have a stadium, but I still think that the measurement is similar. So, I think I would focus on a stadium per se, but I'd focus on probably some of these problematic assemblies, and then probably go back to the areas that we have discussion and say, would that increase or decrease? Because like the Bridge Community Church, we know what size the lot is, we know how many parking stalls they have, we know what size assembly hall they have. We'd be able to tell you what a change would or wouldn't do with that. Same with the reception center.
And I still think you should focus on those ones, even if we don't have it in our city right now, we should still address those if we feel like the parking isn't, right on, just because who knows in the future what will happen.
Yeah, I think like reception center, that's something that I could see that being a likely thing that we'd have an application come to us in the future or something like that. So one other thing that I had a thought on was the schools. Certainly we don't have a high school, and I don't see us ever having a high school. But we do have several elementary schools and a junior high. So I'll be honest with you, comparing us to some of the other two cities, which is Farmington and North Salt Lake. I like ours better because it provides for a little bit of visitor parking, not a ton, 1 space per employee plus 2 per classroom. You're going to have people helping out, especially in elementary schools. You're going to have visitors and whatnot, versus North Salt Lake that says 2 spaces per classroom. Well, that could be taken up by all the employees by themselves. But
yeah,
anyway.
That's just so you know, that's one of those odd ones in city ordinances. I think it's still good to call out parking for educational, particularly if we end up with private universities and so forth. The state holds regulatory power over their own facilities, and so we're kind of bumped out of the process. But we're getting better and better over time that these facilities do talk to the local communities. And, because they need sewer service, they need water service. And so we have some backdoor influence. Just a gee whiz war story. When I worked for Ogden City, the post office wanted to come in and they said, we don't want to deal with any of your regulations. We're the federal government. We don't have to deal with you. And we said, fine, but we do the sewer and the water and, good luck. And they said, oh, that's right. Well, can we talk with you and see what we can work out? And so now that's different than our post office. Our post office is a leased piece of property, not owned by the federal government. So we went through an approval process for the post office. But I think we still should have those in the tables so that we can have discussions with the state when they want to come in and redo a school. We can say, these are kind of our expectations and hopefully you follow them because you impact our community.
Yeah, so Corey, along those lines, I have no idea what the school district's plans are, but certainly the 2 oldest schools in our city, I think, are the J. Taylor Elementary and Centerville Junior High. I think the other elementary schools are newer than those ones. But I could see maybe, for example, Taylor, the school district says, okay, it's time to start over with this and do a major remodel or something like that. We'd want to have something in place so that we could say, all right, you want to start over or you want to do some significant reconfiguring. Here are some guidelines that we would like you to follow. So you're saying maybe that they wouldn't necessarily have to, but if we have it in place and they might be more inclined to, is that kind of the thought? Or
yeah, I mean, I don't think the school districts are as well versed with UDOT trying to be contextually sensitive to the community. But I think they're getting better over the years of engaging the broader community as they construct, because it does impact neighborhoods. But technically, the school district gets to do whatever they want to do.
Okay, thanks, Corey. I think, yeah, so I think we've had a good discussion here, and I think you have what you need, Corey, to go back and review some of these and come back to us with some recommendations.
Yeah, if you agree with these, then I will just do something similar with our commercial, which is probably another problematic place on a few uses, industrial, just a couple of places. Once we kind of highlight these yellows, and I'll change the terms, then I'll just grab all those yellows and go to town and try to start sorting them out and come back with you with examples.
Sounds good. Okay.
Kind of related to that, Corey, I know you just talked really briefly about sort of the planner in you and sort of trying to figure out and balance that. I would love if you come up against a time where you're feeling like you're feeling that tug in the pull. I think it would be interesting to just know, like, planner best practices type of thing for this sort of area. And then you could even say, and that's that related to what our neighbors are doing. It might be the same, might be different. I just want to know, like, not just because everyone else is doing it, this is the way we should do it, but I would like to see, this is why, as a planner, these are the trade-offs between, more landscaping or, compliance or whatever it is that you kind of feel that tug. I would like that to be part of the conversation as well.
I'm more than happy to be able to kind of weigh in and not get too extreme. I mean, there's the extreme planner that says, let's worry about footprints and uses, and if they can't get enough parking, that's their own problem.
No, I mean, I think you can bring us a measured approach that allows for us to understand, justifications in why we might be under or over parked or whatever it is. I think that'd be helpful. And also justifications, I think you've said in the past, maybe sometimes our churches are, let's just say they're underparked or something, or, in our parks, I know I used to live by a park and I was like, oh man, they spill out on the street. And I would like for you to say, which you said to me at the time, it was designed so that there is some spillover, that we aren't going to always have all of the spots for every single person that's always going to visit the park, but that sometimes we're using the on-street parking and that's part of the planning. So I just want to know some of these things, because previously when I joined the Planning Commission, I didn't recognize that. I was like, oh, we should have, exactly amount or whatever. So just that type of discussion, I think, would be helpful as well.
Yeah, I'd be happy. That's kind of the argument, that on-street parking slows down traffic, and a little bit of congestion actually is beneficial. But if you can't find a parking stall, it doesn't matter how slow or fast you're going, you're mad. So
right. And we can have a discussion about in what instances is that appropriate and all that stuff,
yeah, we'll talk about that.
Great. All right, let's move on to the next one. Corey, it's still you. You want to talk about the Community Development Director's report?
Yeah, just real quick, I put the tentative for your next meeting because working a few of those applicants, their applications are sort of incomplete. And we're making a strategic call on which ones can make the agenda, or we can feel comfortable there's enough information for you to make a decision. So there's a number of items on there. So we'll move forward with that, and we'll notify you what comes into place. If you have questions on where some of those projects are, I could answer it for you. And then the City Council so far, they've done a few plat amendments, a couple of plat amendments, but there's been nothing recommended from the commission as of late to them. So there's nothing for us to report.
Corey, has there been discussion yet about potential goal settings work session with the City Council for 2021?
There hasn't. My first real official meeting with the city manager about the budgetary process just happened a week and a half ago. They sent out some sheets to us. That's where we start engaging with the city administration. And that's where we'll start discussing a timeline for goals, talk with the council. So I should know shortly. Most of the time they've been open, but there was one year they said, we don't need it. So I hope they don't say that again, but.
Does that mean we can just do our own thing?
Yeah. Set your own goals.
Nice.
But I'll let you know. I probably in February would know kind of their timeline and schedule.
Okay. Thanks, Corey. All right, and then I don't see any minutes attached for this meeting. Mackenzie?
Yeah, so I was just pulling them up to go through them and saw, it's like, oh, they're not there. I did add them and then I deleted them for reasons I don't know why. So I'll just add them to the next meeting.
Okay, that sounds good. We'll do them at the next meeting. So, all right. Well, it's been a good meeting. It's been very helpful to have a good discussion and stuff. And I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I will move that we adjourn.
Second,
I'll second.
All right. All those in favor say aye.
I.
Aye.